politicians always say. That's right, they talk about it, but we're going to do something about it. No doubt, no doubt.
The lead story in my life these days was Brianna Stone, known as the Rock at Metro Police. And yes, she was all of that. Solid, profound, lovely.
She'd become a part of my life to the point where I couldn't imagine it without her anymore. Things hadn't been this sane and balanced for me in years.
Of course, it didn't hurt that homicide at Metro was so quiet lately. As a cop, you can't help but wonder when that next ton of bricks is going to fall. But in the meantime, Bree and I had an unheard-of 2-hour lunch that Thursday afternoon. Usually the only way we see each other during the day is if we're working the same murder case. We sat in the back at Ben's Chili Bowl under all the signed celeb photos. "So you know what they're calling us around the office these days?" Bree said, halfway through a coffee milkshake. "Brelex." "Brelex? Like Brad and Angelina? That's awful." She laughed. She couldn't even keep a straight face at that. I'm telling you, cops have no imagination. After lunch, we strolled hand in hand up U Street to Sharita Williams' jewelry store. Sharita was an old friend from high school, and she also happened to do outstanding work on antique pieces. A dozen tiny bells tinkled over our heads as we breezed in the door. "Well, don't you two look in love?" Sharita smiled from behind the counter. "That's 'cause we are, Sharita," I said, "and I highly recommend it." "Just find me a good man, Alex, I'm in." She knew why we were there, and she removed a small black velvet box from under the case. "It came out beautifully," she said. "I love this piece." The ring used to belong to my grandmother, Nana Mama, she of the impossibly small hands. We'd had it resized for Bree. It was a platinum deco setting with 3 diamonds across, which struck me as perfect, one for each of the kids. Maybe it's corny, but it was like that ring represented everything Bree and I were committed to. This was a package deal, after all, and I felt like the luckiest man in the world. I put in a late afternoon appearance at the Daily Building. This was as good a time as any to catch up on the flood of paperwork that never seemed to stop flowing across my desk. But when I got to the major case squad room, Chief Perkins was just coming out into the hall with somebody I didn't recognize. "Alex," he said. "Good. You'll save me another trip. Walk with us?" Something was obviously up, and it wasn't good. When the chief wants a meeting, you go to him, not the other way around. I did a 180, and we headed back over to the elevators. "Alex, meet Jim Heekin. Jim's the new AD at the Directorate of Intelligence over at the Bureau." We shook hands. Heekin said, "I've heard a lot about you, Detective Cross. The FBI's loss was MPD's gain when you came back over here." "Uh-oh," I said. "Flattery's never a good sign." We all laughed, but it was also true. Once we were settled in Perkins's big office, Heekin got a lot more specific. "Can I assume you're familiar with our FIGs?" he asked me. "Field intelligence groups," I said. "I've never worked with them directly, but sure." The FIGs had been created to develop and share intelligence products with the law enforcement communities in their respective jurisdictions. Heekin went on. "As you probably know, the DC group interfaces with all police departments in our area, including MPD. Also NSA, ATF, Secret Service, you name it. We've got monthly conference calls and then FaceTime on an as-needed basis, depending on where the action is. Generally, police chiefs represent their departments with the FIGs," he continued with his steady, well-paced speech, "but we'd like you to take over that position for MPD." "Thank you," I said. "That's very nice, but I'm good where I am." "Yes, exactly. Major case squad's a perfect fit for this position. If anything, it's going to make your job easier." This wasn't an offer, I realized, so much as an assignment. "No title change," I said. "I'm an investigator first, not some kind of administrator." Perkins grinned across the desk. He also looked relieved. "Fine with me. Keeps you in the same pay grade. And my cases take priority over anything else I might have to do?" "I don't think that's going to be a problem," Heekin said, already standing up to go. He shook my hand again at the door. "Congratulations, Detective. You're moving up in the world." Yeah, I thought, whether I want to or not.
Denny led the way, and Mitch followed like the man-child in that old Steinbeck book of Mice and Men.
"Right up here, bud. Let's keep it moving."
The 10th floor was also the top floor. Sheets of plastic hung over sections of 2x4 wall frame with nothing but raw plywood underfoot. A stack of pallets by the 18th Street windows made a good roosting spot. Denny unrolled the plastic tarp and spread it on the floor. They dropped their packs. He put a hand on Mitch's back and pointed to where they'd just come up.
Primary exit,
he said, then turned 90 degrees to face another door.
Alternate exit.
Mitch nodded once each time.
And if we get separated, wipe down the weapon, dump it, and meet you back at the car. That's my man.
They'd been over it maybe 50 times beginning to end. Drilling was the key. Mitch had all kinds of raw talent, but Denny did the thinking for both of them.
Any questions? Denny asked. This is the time to ask them. Later on, it won't matter worth a damn.
No, Mitch said. His voice had gone flat and distant, the way it always did when he was concentrating on something else. He'd already set the M110 fitted with a sound suppressor on its bipod and was zeroing it out, calibrating the scope. Denny assembled his own M21 and slung it flat against his back. If everything went according to plan, he'd never have to use it, but it made sense to have a backup. The Walther was also holstered on his thigh. He used a compass-set diamond blade to cut a perfect 2-inch circle in the window, then pulled the section away with a small suction cup. The streetlights outside sent up a glare that made the window act like a mirror from below. While Mitch got into position, Denny cleaned another small spot just up and to the left, where he could practically look over Mitch's shoulder and down the rifle barrel. Even their difference in height worked well. He took his sighting scope out of its case. From here they had a clear line to the entrance of Taberna del Alabardero. With the scope's 100 times magnification, Denny could practically see the pores on the faces of the people coming and going from the hot shit restaurant.
Here, piggy, piggy, piggy,
he whispered. Denny made his final check. All they needed now was a target, and that would be arriving real soon. At around 7:35, a black Lincoln Navigator pulled up in front of Taberna del Alabardero, a hotsy DC eatery for the stars. 2 men got out of the back on either side and another emerged from the front, while the driver stayed in the car. All 3 wore dark suits with barely distinguishable ties.
Banker's tie, thought Denny. Wouldn't wear one to my own funeral. The 2 from the back seat. You got it covered?
I got it, Denny. Everything was dialed in. Denny watched the targets through his own scope. This was the best seat in the house. Second best, anyway.
Shooter ready?
Ready.
Send it.
Mitch slowly exhaled, then pulled off 2 shots in the same number of seconds. Paper trails showed in the air. Both men went down, one on the sidewalk and the other flat up against the front door of the restaurant. It was kind of visually spectacular, actually. 2 perfect headshots to the bases of 2 skulls. People were already freaking out in the street. The third man literally dove back into the car while everyone else ran or ducked and covered their heads. They didn't need to worry. The mission was over. Mitch had already begun to break down. The man was as fast as a speedway mechanic. Denny unslung the M21, pulled off the magazine, and started packing. 40 seconds later, they were both on the stairs, double-timing it down to street level.
Hey, Mitch, you weren't planning on running for elected office, were you?
Mitch laughed.
Maybe president someday. You did perfect up there. You should be proud. I am proud, Denny. That's 2 dead crumb bums nobody's got to worry about no more. And you know who the hero of the story is, right, Mitchie?
He asked.
Nobody but us, man. Damn straight, we did it ourselves. A couple of real, live American heroes.
The scene outside Taberna del Alabardero was a total zoo when we got there. This was no ordinary hit or rub-out. I knew that much without even getting out of the car. The radio had been blaring about a long-distance hit from a gunman that nobody had seen, firing shots that nobody had heard. And then there were the victims. Congressman Victor Vinton was dead, along with Craig Pilkey, a well-known banking lobbyist who had recently dragged both of them into the headlines. These homicides were a scandal wrapped in another scandal. So much for quiet times in homicide. Both dead men were the subject of a federal inquiry regarding influence peddling on behalf of the financial services industry. There were allegations about backroom deals and campaign contributions and all the wrong people getting rich or richer, while middle-class citizens had continued to lose their homes in record numbers. It wasn't hard to imagine someone wanting Vinton and Pilkey dead. A lot of people probably did. Both bodies were covered on the sidewalk when my buddy John Sampson and I reached the awning in front of the restaurant. Capitol Police were already there, with FBI on the way. High profile means high pressure in D.C., and you could all but cut with a knife the mounting tension inside that yellow perimeter tape. We found another of our own, Mark Grieco, from 3rd District, and he briefed us. Given all the noise in the street, we had to shout just to hear one another. "How many witnesses do we have?" Sampson asked. "At least a dozen," Grieco told us. "We've got them all corralled inside, each one more freaked out than the last. No visual on the shooter, though." "What about the shots?" I asked in Grieco's ear. "We know where they came from?" He pointed over my shoulder, up 18th Street. "Way over there, if you can believe it. They're securing the building now." On the north corner of K Street, a couple of blocks away, there was a building under some kind of renovation. Every floor was dark except for the top one, where I could just make out people moving around. "You gotta be kidding me," I said. "How far is that?" 250 yards, maybe more, Grieco guessed. The three of us started jogging in that direction. This whole MO, the distance of the shot, the impossible angle, the murders themselves, not one perfect hit, but two in a crowded environment, was completely audacious. I think we were meant to be impressed. In a strictly professional capacity, I was still a little stunned. But I also had a sinking dread in the pit of my stomach. That ton of bricks I'd been wondering about, it had just fallen.
Like a lot of law enforcement brotherhood, FBI case agent Stephen Malinowski was divorced. Accordingly, there wasn't much to come home to, and he didn't pull into his driveway until just after 11:30 that night.
"Hey, Malinowski."
The agent's whole body jerked and he reached for the holster under his jacket.
"Don't shoot, it's me."
Kyle stepped around the corner of the garage and into the light of the street lamp just long enough to give a glimpse of his face.
"It's Max Siegel, Steve."
Malinowski squinted hard at him in the dark.
"Siegel? What in Christ?"
He let the flap of his jacket fall back again.
"You almost gave me a damn heart attack. What the hell are you doing here? Can we talk inside?"
Kyle asked. It would have been 3 years since Malinowski and Siegel had spoken. The voice had to be good, but not perfect.
"I'll go run back, okay? Let me in."
Malinowski looked up and down the street.
Yeah, of course."
By the time he let Siegel in through the sliding glass door to the kitchen, he'd turned off the lights in front and pulled all the shades. He dropped his weapon into a kitchen drawer and pulled 2 long necks out of the fridge. He offered one to Max.
"Talk to me, Siegel. What's going on? What are you doing here at this hour?"
Kyle refused the beer. He didn't want to touch anything he didn't have to.
"The op's completely blown," he said. "I don't know how, but they found me out. I had no choice but to come in. You look like shit, by the way. Those bruises around your eyes. Should have seen me a week ago. A couple of Arturo Buenas' boys worked me over pretty good." "Why didn't you signal?"
Malinowski asked, and that was the one thing Kyle had never been able to figure out. How Max Siegel was to have made contact with his handler in an emergency.
"I was lucky to get out at all," he said. "I've been lying low in Florida till I could get up here. Fort Myers, Vero Beach, Jacksonville." "So who else should I be talking to?" Kyle asked.
The agent shook his head.
"Nobody." "Not DEA? Anyone in D.C.? "There's no one, Siegel. You were out there on your own."
He looked up suddenly.
"Why don't you know that?" "Give me a break, man. I'm all messed up. Look at me."
Kyle took a step closer to where Malinowski was leaning back against the range.
Seriously, really look at me.